So, welcome, dear friends. Very glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome. Um, we're really excited to have a dear friend with us today, Robert Ellsberg, who will be speaking about Dorothy Day. Adam will be interviewing him, um, and he'll introduce him in a moment. But we'll start off with our usual. Um, Situating this in the bigger picture of things. So this, as you know, is a speaker series. And so on May 27th, we have our next speaker, Kazu Haga, who will be speaking about Dr. King um, as a spiritual radical, a nonviolent spiritual radical. Dorothy will put that in the chat for you. And she'll also share just our usual technical things for having a wonderful Zoom experience together. And we also wanted to let you know that you can get all of this information through the Substack link, where we'll send you the recording after this today. And both Adam and I also have Substacks where we write our own newsletters. So Dorothy will put that in the chat as well. And if you would like to offer a donation for tonight's event, we will put that information in the chat also. And we have a day of practice in nature coming up on May 25th. At the monastery, Our Lady of the Resurrection Monastery in LaGrangeville. So there's information about that in the chat as well, from 10 to 4 p.m. on Sunday, May 25th. Okay, so we want to invite you to just come into your own body and breath and present moment experience and connect with how you are as you're arriving here, what's alive for you. And so that we have a sense of who is here and what's alive in the group, we want you to invite you to put something in the chat, a word or phrase, how you're doing. Peace in oneself, peace in the world, a moment of transition, curious and open, tired, a bit tired, but happy to be here. Grateful to be here, looking forward to learning about Dorothy Day. Looking forward to the talk today. So we welcome any other check-ins as they arrive. Brokenhearted about what's happening in the world. Grateful to be in beloved community. A quiet sense of mourning for all that's happening in the world. Yeah, thank you for naming these difficult times. Grateful to be here. Feels grounding to be in community. you. Um, well, thank you, dear friends. We're going to turn it over now to Adam, who will guide us in the meditation and then introduce Robert. And after an interview with Robert, there will be time for you to ask questions of Robert.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you. We will start with meditation, which will be maybe about 15 minutes or so. And then after that, I will introduce Robert and ask him some questions so we can be in conversation. So to begin with, I would like you uh, to simply take a moment to settle into stillness. Find a posture that allows you to be both relaxed and attentive. You can close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so. And begin to gently bring your awareness to your breath. Let your breath be natural, unforced, and just simply notice it. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. And now place yourself in the presence of the divine. Just imagine the loving gaze of the sacred resting on you. The gaze of Christ or the Buddha, or however you envision the divine to be. The gaze of deep compassion, wisdom, on care, just simply resting on you. And just know that you are in the presence of mercy, tenderness, and love. And now, as you are sitting in the presence of the divine, I invite you to ask for a special grace, a grace to be able to see your life and especially all the people you've met through the eyes of the divine, through those eyes of deep care and compassion. Let that prayer rise from your heart in silence, saying, "Help me see my life through the eyes of deep care and wisdom." And now gently let your mind reflect on this question. Who are some of the people in your life who have helped you feel closer to the divine? who have helped you say yes to the dream that perhaps is very much alive in your heart, the dream to be part of transfiguring the world. Who are some of those people in your life who have helped you to feel closer to God, closer to what's deep in your heart? And who are the people who have helped you respond to the circumstances of your life with courage? Either personal circumstances or some of the circumstances you see in the world. Just name one, two, or more people who have played that kind of role in your life. Let them come to mind gently. Let yourself feel their presence. Let yourself remember what they gave you, what they showed you, how they made you feel. And now reflect on how the gifts that you've received from them have changed you. How is your life different because of them? And now again, picturing some of those people who have touched you deeply, who have awakened your heart to things. Imagining them just in your heart, send them loving kindness and appreciation, a simple thank you, a recognition of the sacredness of what passed between you, a simple inner blessing radiating from your heart to theirs. And now send yourself that same appreciation, loving kindness for yourself, for not having missed those opportunities to learn, for not having missed the opportunity to receive those gifts. And now, as you look ahead, think about how the people you've named are calling you to show up for these particular times. What qualities are they calling forth in you? What kind of presence do they invite you to be in the world today? And now let's just rest in silence for a few minutes in the presence of the divine, allowing all that grace, all that love, all that energy to flow into you, to give you courage, to give you energy, to hold you, to love you, to encourage you. And let's just rest in that energy, in a state of receptivity, openness, and consent. Then, when you are ready, bring your attention back to your breath, back to your body, back to this space. And then gently, whenever you're ready, open your eyes. Okay, thank you for meditating with me. So today we have a very special guest, and I wanted to introduce him now. Robert Ellsberg, who is both a publisher of Orbis books for a very long time, but also an extraordinary writer and editor whose life's work has been, in many ways, devoted to illuminating the stories of saints, prophets, and um, really spiritual pioneers. As a young man, he also had the very rare privilege of working closely with Dorothy Day. Um, she appointed him as editor-in-chief of the Catholic Worker newspaper that I know I used to read when I was in college, and we still get it at our diocese. So whenever I see um, a new issue, I'm always eager to read it. Since then, he has curated and edited some of the most important collections of Dorothy Day's writings, including The Duty of the Light, the Diaries of Dorothy Day, um, also selected letters of Dorothy Day. Um, Through his own books, among my favorites are The Saint's Guide to Happiness. And that is something that I return to quite often. I originally, I think, discovered this copy. A priest sent it to me because he said, I spent, my whole retreat going through this book and you should absolutely have it. So the copy that was sent to me has many, many notes in it. Another book that was a companion on my last retreat was A Living Gospel, Reading God's Story in Holy Lives. In addition to that, there are some other wonderful books, such as Dearest Sister Wendy, A Surprising Story of Faith and Friendship, which is an extraordinary book of really letters documenting the friendship between this amazing elderly wise nun and Robert. And just maybe something about Orby's books that I wanted to say. It's one of the most extraordinary publishing houses. When I go to bookstores, I often find myself in the religion section, and my first impulse is always to go like this to scan for the Orbis logo, because I know that when there is something with Orbis logo, most likely it's going to be very good. And Orbis is known for really kind of introducing the liberation theology in the US, and over the years, I mean, over the decades, has published so many extraordinary books, and Robert has been responsible for all of that. So I'm so grateful for his work there. And maybe one final thing that I wanted to mention is that Robert sort of continues to carry forward a legacy of faithful witness, something that runs deep in his family, because he is a son of Daniel Ellsberg, the very well-known whistleblower who risked everything to release the Pentagon Papers and expose the truth about the Vietnam War. So Robert, thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful that you are here with us, and we are so grateful that we can see you again.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's wonderful to be with you.
So
Could I add one thing to the
yes,
introduction? Um, we're very lucky to have Robert as a friend, and I just wanted to share that Robert got to spend time with Thich Nhat Hanh as a young teenager. He found him in the age of no cell phones or GPS or internet. He found him in Paris, coming from England, and spent some time with Thai and Sister Chung Kong in the very early days when they were still working with refugees coming out of Vietnam, living in Paris. So he has lovely stories about that. And Orbis published a book on essential writings of Thich Nhat Hanh also. So just want to loop that
which
together,
Robert edited, and it's my favorite collection of Thich Nhat Hanh's writings.
which I don't think that book would have come into being without Robert initiating that,
Mm.
saying we need to do this. So anyway, because last speaker series was on Thai, I just wanted to bring that connection here. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for
Thanks. So, Robert, you've met so many of my favorite sort of saints. I'm a little jealous, but I'm so glad that you always are willing to share their stories. And one of those people is Dorothy Day. I discovered Dorothy Day after coming to this country as I was going to college, and I think it was Father Robert um, Lauder, who taught at St. John's University, and he taught existentialism and was sort of fascinated with films. And he encouraged all of his students to read Dorothy. That's how I discovered her in Poland. We didn't necessarily know about her, even though recently a new excellent biography in Polish came out. So we're very happy about that. But I was wondering if you could just maybe introduce her to us before we even sort of get into, how it was to be around her, just sort of basics of her life, and some of the turning points that really defined her path.
gladly. Thank you very much, both Kyra Joel and Adam. I consider myself very lucky to have met you among one of the great souls that I've known, and to be your friend. And I'm glad to be here with you tonight to talk about Dorothy. Um, Dorothy Day died in 1980 at the age of 83, and I worked with her, as it turned out, the last 5 years of her life. I knew her as a kind of a heroic peacemaker, activist. I came to the Catholic worker at the sort of tail end of the Vietnam War, which had, because of my father and other things, had weighed very heavily on my early life. And I was sort of looking for a path of how to live out my own kind of commitment at that point to the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. And I kind of lit upon the Catholic worker as a good place to start. I wasn't a Catholic at the time. I'd been raised in the Episcopal Church, but her Catholicism was not what drew me there. I went there in spite of that. So it was quite remarkable that after just a few months, she asked me to be the managing editor of the Catholic Worker. And so I didn't really go there knowing a whole lot about her. Um, since then, I've now well, this year actually will be 50 years since I went there, which seems pretty hard to believe. So really, my whole life has been spent trying to figure out just who she was and kind of reflect on the things that she taught me. A lot of that has come not from knowing her, but from living deeply with her writings over all those years. I edited my first volume of her writings just after she died. It was published in 1983, Dorothy Day's Selected Writings, which meant that I read everything that had been published. later on, I was asked to edit her diaries and her letters, and that opened up a whole new world for me in terms of understanding her. And as you say, it's continued up to the present 6 volumes that I've done. So anybody can know Dorothy in that way now through the work that I've studied and shared. But otherwise, Dorothy is very well known for her autobiography, The Long Loneliness, which is kind of a classic spiritual memoir published in 1952. She'd published an earlier memoir in 1938 that just told the earlier part of her life and her up to her conversion, becoming a Catholic at the age of whatever that was, 20, 26 or something like that. The Long Loneliness tells that whole story in greater detail, very artfully. But then also the second half of her life, which began in 1932 when she met a Frenchman named Peter Morin, who opened up her real vocation and the Catholic worker in the rest of her life. Going back, so she was born in 1897. She had a kind of pious side to her even as a child, though her family were not religious. When she went to college, she actually gave up any interest in Christianity because she felt that Christians were not really addressing the issues, the world of the poor and issues of social injustice. She, by that time, was her heroes were labor organizers and the socialists and anarchists, and she wanted to walk in their footsteps. So she dropped out of college after 2 years and went to New York, where she worked as a young woman on a series of left-wing journals. And so all of her friends were radicals of one stripe or another. Many of them became founding members of the Communist Party, but there were anarchists and labor activists and members of the IWW, the International Workers of the World. There were pacifists, there were other kinds of poets and literary bohemian types. And so that was the kind of world that she was in. And even there, again, in her memoir, she recalls all these experiences that show that, as she said, all my life I was haunted by God, not in a formal connection with any church or religion at that point, but you see that it was kind of this part of her restlessness was this kind of spiritual yearning for the transcendent, for some deeper meaning, but it was kind of in competition with her, commitment to social justice in this world, because she felt that Christians sort of put all their emphasis on heaven and the by and by, and not really engaged with trying to change the world. She said that when she learned about the saints as a young girl, she said she admired their service to the poor and the sick. She said, but there was another question in her mind: why was so much done to minister to to the poor and the sick, and not to change the social conditions that cause so much poverty? Where were the saints to change the social order? She said, not just to minister to the slaves, but to do away with slavery. So that was a challenge that she felt, as a young person, and in many ways, it kind of pointed in the direction of her vocation, how to try to find that path of holiness that connected her faith, her religious striving with a commitment to the poor and oppressed. So in her memoir, she looks back at her whole life, of course, from the perspective of her conversion, and sees and had the feeling that everything that had happened to her before that, that God was present in that, and not just in these kind of moments of piety or spiritual exaltation, but even in the kind of tragic aspects of her life. She was arrested with the suffragists for picketing in front of the White House, and spent 10 days fasting in jail. And it was a very brutal experience in solitary confinement. She had kind of at her lowest point, she had a kind of passionate love affair with a newspaperman, found that she was pregnant, and ended up having an abortion, which didn't go well. And she said afterwards she actually tried to kill herself twice. So she had these, there's a lot of drama in her early life. A kind of turning point begins in the mid-20s when she's now living in Staten Island, and she falls in love with a man named Forster, and she finds real happiness for the first time in her life, real love. He's kind of a sort of a naturalist, is very interested in science, and he just made nature come alive for her in a new way. She'd always been a city person. Um, and she found herself in her happiness just finding that she was praying as she walked along the beach, reading the Psalms and thinking about God, not because she was unhappy, but because she was happy. And at that point, she discovered that she was pregnant again. And this was a huge event for her. I think she had believed that she couldn't have children after her abortion. And it seemed like this sort of second chance. And she decided that she wanted to have her child baptized as a Catholic. Why a Catholic? She thought that the Catholic Church was the church of the poor. She loved the kind of sacramental sort of, spirituality of the church. The bread and wine and the incense and candles and all this sort of thing. The very physicality of it appealed to her. She had been dipping into the lives of the saints, but she didn't actually know any Catholics. So it was, in a way, it was very surprising to her friends who were atheists. Those included Forster, her partner. He had nothing. It would have nothing to do with religion, and he would not get married. He didn't believe in marriage as an anarchist. And so, she went ahead and had her child baptized, Tamar, her daughter, and then felt increasingly that it was inevitable that she was going to follow on that path. But it was just terrible tension between the two of them because she kept hoping that he would agree to marry her, and he wouldn't. So she went in to be baptized and had no feeling of joy in that. She felt kind of sick to her stomach. She describes going on the Staten Island ferry out to Staten Island to do this. She said it was just something I had to do. She said it got to the point where it was a choice between God and man, and I chose God painfully. Now, it's more complicated than that, as I discovered when I edited her letters and discovered that for 5 years after that, she was writing him these plaintive, pleading love letters, trying to persuade him to change his mind to marry her. I think that's a story that was not, she didn't tell that in her book. And it adds, I think, extra kind of pathos to the whole story. The turning point then comes in December 1932. She goes to Washington this is during the Depression, to cover a hunger march of the unemployed, which was being organized by her communist friends. And as she watched this march, she thought, why aren't Catholics leading a march like this? So she goes to the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. It was actually the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And she said she there offered a prayer with tears and much anguish that some way would open up for her to connect her faith with her commitment to the poor and oppressed. Because apart from the separation from Forster, she felt this other loss. She felt that she was betraying her class. She was betraying her radical friends and all those who had kind of brought her, she felt, to this point through their love of the poor, their dedication to the poor. At that time, she didn't see how the church could connect with that. So she makes this prayer that she'll find her vocation. Immediately after that, she writes to Forster and says, I realize it's hopeless. I'm giving up on this hope that we're going to be together. And at the same time, she meets this man, Peter Morin, this French kind of peasant philosopher who was 20 years older than she was, who had been tramping around the country doing hard manual labor, studying, and trying to find somebody who would set his kind of his mission into action. And he began instructing her about history and about economics and about kind of Catholic history, the saints, and all this was perspective that she didn't not familiar with before. But the thing that really hooked into her was when he suggested that she start a newspaper to promote the kind of radical social message of the gospel. And immediately that kind of rang a bell. That seemed like this is what I'm made to do. She's been a newspaper person all her life. Her family were all in newspaper business, so she knew how to do that. And she saw that there was a real need for that. And the amazing thing is, here she is, this convert, single mother, hardly knew any Catholics at the time, had not studied theology or been through some kind of formation like that. She'd just been baptized and going to mass every day and reading the Bible. And she decides to start a newspaper, call it the Catholic Worker, and without asking permission from anybody. And the whole idea of this was to show that the Catholic Church can be concerned both with this world and the next, with body and soul, with the material and the spiritual, and that this was a message, that she wanted to bring to the workers and the unemployed. And Peter Morin had a further, step in his program, which was that there should be houses of hospitality to practice the works of mercy, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, etc. And so the paper then was followed by this. And before you knew it, there was a community there living in voluntary poverty among the poor, practicing the works of mercy. But one of the things that was distinctive about the Catholic Worker was that it combined not just this charity or a service, or works of mercy, but also a radical social critique of a society that the values that gave rise to such poverty and need. So it was that kind of combination of, charity and justice was something that she kind of invented. And there was a large response to it, but there was also a deep spiritual foundation because she now found a way of bringing her kind of radical, background into the church with her, and this understanding, recognition that Jesus was a working man. He was a poor man who spent his life among the poor and had a message of hope and liberation for the poor, and that he challenged the powerful of his age, and that had a still radical message for us now. And his message that what we do for the least of his brothers and sisters, we do directly to him, meant that Jesus was not somebody from just 2,000 years ago. To be a Christian was to live in daily kind of confrontation with the living Christ in the faces of the poor and our neighbor. And you loved your neighbor by feeding him, but you also by trying to change a society that left him hungry. So that was, this kind of a long entry. When it comes after that is the whole story of the Catholic Worker. We get into that too, if you want.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Robert. I'm sort of interested in a couple of things based on what you shared. Number one, just sort of the basic program of the Catholic Worker in terms of, the discussions for the clarification of thought, the sort of farms and the houses of hospitality. How does all of it kind of come together, and how is it lived as it emerges out of those initial days?
Well, it's funny how the Worker didn't begin with a sort of manifesto or complex program. It was sort of experimental, but it really did. She really did draw and was very inspired by ideas of Peter Morin. I mean, he was sort of an idea man, and she kind of did all the work, you might say, set this in motion. But he had written hundreds of little essays that reflected his philosophy. So one of those was that this kind of idea of personalism, that you should live out the values that you're promoting. And it was not enough just to have a newspaper that just protested and pointed to all the things that were bad in the world. You had to have a kind of positive vision of an alternative, and you should try to live out that vision in the present. even now, this old radical expression, building the new world in the shell of the old. So that was an aspect of it. They drew, from a kind of eclectic sources in the Christian tradition, including the kind of Benedictine ideal of community, and which includes also the practice of hospitality, the kind of balance of a kind of philosophy of work you talked about, of combining the work could be undertaken in a way that had the character of prayer, if it was done with a kind of holy intention. And like Saint Benedict, in the rule of Saint Benedict, says that that the monastery is a school of charity, and it's not just because everybody is so nice in the monastery, but as opposed to the old kind of idea of the desert fathers who went off into the desert and kind of battled their kind of demons and extreme isolation and asceticism, that the discipline, the asceticism of the monastery was in community and learning to love the people who are close by you, whether they're very likable or not. So the Catholic worker always had this kind of a very inclusive sort of feeling of there were people who were so-called guests who might be there temporarily or might be there for the rest of their lives, who were kind of part of this sort of family. And they were often people who'd come there out of need of a place to stay and had kind of stayed on and become part of this community. Then there were people who were there, often younger people who, for a shorter period of time, like me, who were kind of drawn by the ideas of the Catholic worker, and it was a kind of school, which is Dorothy said that was part of what it was all about. So the works of mercy, of course, and then in the early on in the 30s, and then continued. Another kind of unique aspect of the Catholic worker was the commitment to nonviolence, gospel nonviolence, that Dorothy really brought into the church at a time when when pacifism or something that was considered for people in peace churches, like Quakers or Mennonites or Anabaptists, something like that. Not for Catholics. Catholics, strong believers in just war theory and that sort of thing. And this was remarkable that Dorothy, who again, who is she? She's started the Catholic work when she was 35, and suddenly she's got a whole kind of a vision. But for her, it just followed directly from the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus's teachings on the love of enemies and of the kind of nonviolence that he practiced in his life as well as in his teachings. Blessed are the peacemakers. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And had kind of brought a different way. And this was a kind of teaching that, aside from these peace churches and the Franciscans and certain religious communities, was a kind of lost teaching of the gospel. So much canon law, so much theology, based on slim little interpretations of the New Testament or the writings of Paul or something like that, and seeming to not take seriously, in the slightest, what Jesus seemed to say about peace. But for her, it also was connected to that. Jesus is teaching that what we do for the least of our neighbors, what we do to others, is what we're doing directly to Him, and that's not just in feeding Him; it could also be in torturing Him or bombing Him. So that was one of the kind of most radical aspects of the Catholic worker, which it's funny. Someone today corrected me when I said this first was expressed in the Spanish Civil War, and she said, "Oh no, it was actually the Ethiopian War, the invasion of Abyssinia." Earlier than that, and I said, "Well, no one cared about that. I mean, that was not controversial. You didn't, nobody would pay any attention if you said I'm not taking a side on the Abyssinian War." The Spanish Civil War, however, was really divided. Her friends on the left, who were all in support of the Loyalists, and the Catholic Church, almost universally supporting Franco, very few exceptions. So that was considered very controversial, and from people on both sides who might have been sympathetic to her. And then World War II came, and she published this thing saying that the Sermon on the Mount is our manifesto, and that she was going to continue her pacifist position. The Catholic worker shrunk at that time. A lot of people left, walked sadly away. In the 1950s, she became more of an activist. She was arrested every year for refusing to participate in compulsory civil defense drills. And in the 60s, then with the rise of the anti-Vietnam War movement, and there really was now a growing Catholic peace movement, the Catholic Peace Fellowship, Pax Christi, things like that, the Barricans that came out of that, and suddenly people began to listen and take more seriously what she'd been saying all along. Another aspect of it, though, was this from Peter Morin. He had a strong critique of just urban industrial society, and believed that we had to get back in touch with the earth and with land. So kind of farming communes were also a part of the Catholic worker movement, and they were never, amounted to very successful farms. But I think that now I look at that in a different way as being this sort of ecological consciousness that was part of the Catholic worker from the beginning. This care for our common home, as Pope Francis puts it. So there's another kind of prophetic aspect of it. Well, long answer that we can.
No, that's great. Thank you for that. And Robert, what was it like to sort of work with her? What was she like as a person in daily life, in conversation, in community? Because it's one thing to sort of interact with her writings, but I'm curious, what was your sense when you met her? I remember, I shared it with you over email. I initially went to the Catholic worker in New York, helping them to fold papers, and that was because I was attracted to one of their activists who was, a known kind of Christian anarchist. And very soon I realized that everyone around the table was there because of Dorothy. They answered questions about the guy that I was interested in, but they always went back to Dorothy. So I'm curious, how was it like?
Well, of course, I was there, toward the end of her life. And, obviously she was, in an earlier time was maybe a more formidable figure. And she had kind of run the house with a kind of a firm sort of discipline. Didn't have much tolerance for nonsense, and um, was very opposed to when the kind of early counterculture in the early 60s began to arrive at the Catholic worker before anywhere else. And she was very disturbed by the kind of free love sort of era of the counterculture in the 60s and everything. She was very traditional in her Catholic moral values. She had her in her own life had everything in her life had come out of this sacrifice that she made, and giving up the man she loved, the father of her child, for the sake of her faith, and that meant that she set very high standards for other people as well. I think as she got older, she became a little softer and sympathetic and um, well, identified with the young people because she saw so much of her early life in them, and their kind of yearning for love, their yearning for community, their yearning for some kind of a purpose, and their kind of spirit of instinct for the heroic, as she said, willingness to make sacrifices, willingness to compete with for doing things that were hard rather than just seeking the easy way. And I think that it was remarkable that she seemed to see something in me that evidently to entrust me with this work that I was otherwise completely unqualified for. And yet you could say, well, did she is that how I ended up becoming an editor, or did she see that capacity in me? I think a little of both, because I'd written some articles for the Catholic Worker about Gandhian philosophy, about Gandhian approach to economics and politics and spirituality. And she liked that so much that I think that's had a lot to do with why she asked me to do this, as apart from the fact that no one else really wanted the job at that time. So again, these things in your life that you look back and you say, gosh, this door opened and it changed everything in my life. So I'd only been planning to stay there for a few months, and I ended up staying there for 5 years because she asked me to be the editor. I only did that for 2 years, but it was kind of a life changing thing. And but the other aspect of it was that she was so fun to be with, and that's something that you don't really necessarily get from reading her. You have to
Mhm.
experience that.
Yeah.
That she was very funny. She was a wonderful storyteller. She loved to be around people. She loved conversation. She had a curiosity about people, wanted to know where they were from, and she could find some sort of point of connection. And sometimes that would be, something that you couldn't escape. Like, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who said that when she found out that he had read her favorite book, Bread and Wine by Ignazio Silone, that's all she ever wanted to talk about with him. Um, and she pointed me out to a reporter who was there one time interviewing, and she pointed at me and said he became a Christian from reading Gandhi. She liked that. Um, the It was a time when kind of activism was kind of being renewed in the worker around anti-nuclear things and the arms race, and so we were always going off and getting arrested and going to jail and stuff. Um, she admired people who were hard workers, and she really felt that there should be a balance between work and study. And so people who just worked and didn't ever think about things, were missing something. But more often, people who, like me, who like to just read books and stuff, we had to prove that we were willing to get our hands dirty. Um, but everybody in the house kind of lit up when she came in, and that included the homeless women who were living there, and people off the street all knew about Dorothy and behaved themselves, more or less, when if they weren't drunk when she was around. Um, she was a great reader. She was always reading novels over and over again and talking about literature. She was spent a lot of her time writing letters. That's probably her major occupation. She probably spent hours every day doing that. Sometimes she needed to get away, and she would go on a bus trip somewhere, and on a speaking trip, and that time just alone in a bus was very precious, kind of hermitage for her. Um, she she got up, very early in the morning every day to read scripture, to say the office, say her, always had a rosary in her pocket. She went to daily mass, and kind of the language of the Psalms and stories of the saints were, always in her conversation. She had a very appealing, infectious kind of laugh. Um, she didn't like to be photographed very much, and so when she's being photographed, she's always sort of scowling and looking kind of like a mean old lady. And so, but that was not her. She was also a little deaf, and so she's often you see her kind of straining to hear what you're saying. But she was there was a youthfulness to her, even as she was very old. And, you know, of course, for when we were young, when she was in her 40s, people thought she was really old, but she was pretty old when I saw her. Toward the end of her life, had walked with a cane, and she was kind of stooped over, very thin. Um, but she was always up for an adventure, and she kind of gave the impression that she'd retired, you know. She couldn't do everything herself, but she was there kind of rooting us on. She said, you must always aim high, because if you lower your standards, you won't struggle so hard. You know? And she, again, she always was reminding us not to focus so much on just protesting things, but that we had to live by and believe in and promote an alternative, different kind of values, and we had to show that we could live by those values ourselves, not just point out what was wrong with everybody else. So, you know, that's a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for that. And in terms of, you edited this new wonderful book about her, just sort of a collection of her spiritual writings. I'm curious if we were to sort of talk about some major themes of her spirituality. Like I know in the book, you mentioned this wonderful thing about looking at your life almost as a kind of book of scripture that where you kind of that becomes your revelation, so to speak. I'm curious if you could just maybe talk a couple of those themes, like if we were to sort of, I don't know, follow in her footsteps.
Um, I read a kind of a prayer that Pope Francis wrote when he became a priest. He was, we're here Bergoglio, then an Argentinian Jesuit, and it was a creed where he kind of all the reference to God and Jesus and Mary and the saints, everything were all integrated into aspects of his own life story. And he says at one point, I believe in my life story. That's that if that God is not just in heaven and not just in the scripture, not just in the Eucharist or something, that to believe that God is in our story, that going into just exactly the kind of questions that you were asking during our meditation, to think about who are the people who came into our lives in an important way and pointed us in the right direction, or challenged us, or made an impact on us, or made an impression on us that changed our lives. And Dorothy, in writing about her life, there were these just very small moments sometimes that she was able to remember decades later. One of them was when she was a little girl and she was living in Chicago, and she was looking for her neighbor, her friend Catherine Barrett, who lived next door in this tenement building, and she just burst into the apartment looking for Catherine, and instead found her mother on her knees saying her prayers. And she kind of like was embarrassed, and like she, something private or secret that she walked in on. But Mrs. Barrett just stopped and said, Catherine's not here, come back later or whatever. And then she went back to her prayers. And she said that Dorothy says that she thought about that, not just then, but over many, many years, to think of this woman in the raising all these children in this tenement and building, and not much money, and hard pressed, and not very much time alone. But she would do her dishes, and she would get down and she would pray, and it gave some kind of transcendent meaning or value to her hard, kind of pressed life. And that kind of lit something up in Dorothy, that she found something attractive and compelling there, even as a child. And she could look back over a lifetime, at something like that and say, that's something where I glimpsed something of the kind of true and the beautiful. So, what was interesting in her story, but she's like St. Augustine or Thomas Merton like this as well, and he's kind of looking at your life from that perspective, and you see how it was not just all these moments of revelation where you had a tingly feeling, about God's presence, but often the times of dejection and doubt and uncertainty and feeling of failure, and she had lots of those in her life. And she felt that all of those were part of the story as well, of bringing her to know God. So that was, I think one of the distinctive things about her. I've already spoken about, this kind of conviction about the radical implications of the incarnation and what that means. But one thing that I knew that Saint Therese of Lisieux was one of her favorite saints. This is a French Carmelite nun who died in the same year that Dorothy was born, 1897, in a little convent in Normandy, who died at the age of 24 and left a little spiritual memoir of her own that outlined her spirituality, her spiritual message, which she called the Little Way, which was this idea that in any situation, you didn't have to be in a monastery or you didn't have to do great heroic things. That there was a path to holiness wherever you were, in all of the ordinary duties and work and encounters of your life, if they were done in a spirit of love and with a sense of the presence of God, it would transform everything into this arena of holiness. And Dorothy became really fascinated by this spirituality. And she, Therese is a very popular saint. She was offered this kind of way of the holiness that was available to everybody. But for Dorothy, it was really the foundation of her life in the Catholic worker, that it meant that all of the frustrations and all of the interactions with difficult people in the house, all of these daily opportunities to practice charity, forgiveness, patience, to hold her temper, to curb her tendency to judgment, to restrain her any kind of selfishness. That was a kind of was forming her soul, as a way of holiness. And I when I came to the worker, and a lot of people would associate Dorothy with like the big things she did, getting arrested, marching with the farm workers, not paying her taxes, or standing with young men burning their draft cards, or founding the Catholic Worker, or putting out a newspaper. And they think of, wow, these big things, I can never do these things. But you knew her, and you really got to get inside by reading her diaries. You see, that was just all the outer shell of a deep spiritual energy that was being fueled and refined in just these very small, ordinary interactions. But she also felt, that from Therese, this idea of the idea of the power that lies in small things and hidden things. That the importance of things is not measured by how loud they are, what a big bang they make, but sometimes just a little dripping of water, that can shatter, marble, and that it was, the importance of bearing witness and planting seeds, and of taking one small step at a time. That is how some of the greatest change occurs. And it begins, of course, with ourselves. So she talked about a revolution of the heart, that had to be at the foundation of our larger, dream of revolution in the world. So it was, you could begin wherever you were, but there was every little small act for peace, could be like the mustard seed, that Jesus spoke of, or the loaves and fishes that could feed a multitude, or the seed that dies in the ground and bears much fruit. So that was a very, very important part of her spirituality. She even wrote a book about Therese, which is, I don't think, a very good book, but it's just signified just how important that was to her, because she didn't write that many books.
I remember in your sort of the book of her writings, her essential writings, that I think you say something like that. If you were her editor, you would encourage her to write a book about how she lived the spirituality of Therese versus writing.
A new edition of Therese, they asked me to write an introduction for it, so I read the book over again, and I'd read in her diaries how much she was struggling over this book. In fact, her publisher kind of canceled the contract because they weren't happy at all with what she ended up with, and she wasn't very happy with it either. And I thought that if I were an editor, I would say, don't write a biography of Therese. Write about how the little way in Therese's, spirituality, it has an impact or informs your daily life as a Catholic worker. And this was all the time when she was being arrested for the civil defense drills. If she'd written, about Therese in that context, Therese in the context of the House of Hospitality, that or being a mother or grandmother or whatever, that would have been fascinating. And that story is actually sort of in her diaries. That's what her diaries are really about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have a couple of more questions, but we don't have that much time. I'm wondering if there are any other questions if there are any questions from people um, who are on the call with us. Maybe as we are waiting, the question that I have is, Robert, you've spent much of your life sort of editing, people like Dorothy or Thich Nhat Hanh, but also writing about saints, some of them quite contemporary saints and prophets and spiritual uh, leaders. And I'm curious when you especially think about some of the contemporary people like Thich Nhat Hanh or Thomas Merton or some of the other people that have been around, in the 20th or maybe even early 21st century. Um, I'm curious, where do you think Dorothy Day fits in that sort of landscape or lineage?
Um, well, the kind of speaking from a Catholic perspective, not in the kind of universal world of holiness and spiritual masters. I've edited a series called Modern Spiritual Masters, and in fact, my new book is the latest in that series. I've done about 75 volumes, including Thich Nhat Hanh, including writers and whatever. And it's hard to say like what do they all have in common exactly. But to me, they had not just a teaching, but they embodied the teaching. So that I'm particularly interested in the kind of people who didn't just have a philosophy or kind of thoughts, but that their own story was kind of the best exemplification of what their teaching was. And Dorothy Day is certainly that it's not coincidence that we just started by kind of telling her story because uh, it, it's you can't really talk about what she believed or what she taught except to know where that kind of came from. Uh, but I think that from a Catholic point of view, the fact that uh, the kind of example of a holiness of lay people, not so many saints are priests or nuns or bishops or monks or that sort of thing, and there's this kind of sense of that is the realm of holiness. That's kind of a holy profession, um, and that's a different class of people because their lives are devoted to God or whatever. And Dorothy really showed that there was that all people are called to holiness in their own kind of context, their own life, and then of course I think this way that she there are many saints who she says who cared for the poor, Mother Teresa, and Saint Francis, or all kinds of religious orders that cared for orphans and cared for children and the sick people or the prisoners or whatever. But the way that she combined that charity, with passion for justice was something that she really kind of invented. Now, you can look at lots of examples since then. Um, then there's her kind of vindication of that kind of peace message of Jesus. I think that is extraordinary. Um, um, and she took so much from even when I talked about Therese, there's so many kind of spiritual teachers and saints that she drew on, but she kind of took from them what kind of fit and supported her own kind of distinctive spiritual synthesis. Um, and I was invited to give a talk just this weekend on Dorothy Day and the future of theology. And I thought, well, Dorothy didn't read, theology, and yet I said that that maybe she points toward a kind of the theology that would allow there to be a future, because she's concerned with the things that ultimately matter about the future of the world and our survival and learning to love one another. Some of the things that she talked about, whether it was the option for the poor or the kind of radical message of peace that you could say, well, that in the era of nuclear weapons, and proliferation and weapons of mass destruction, everything that message becomes has an existential urgency to it. We move in that direction, or we move towards self-destruction. So these kind of values, these humane sort of values that would show what it would be like if we had a world that was based on principles of community and hospitality and mutual love and care for one another, unselfishness and lack of materialism. And you say, well, she didn't invent all that. Just go look at the Beatitudes. That's what it's all about. Poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the hunger and thirst for justice, etc. You could go and do a commentary on the Beatitudes through how Dorothy lived those, but she also expanded them in a way that I understand more what they mean when I say, well, what does it mean to say blessed are those who mourn? I think of it. It has to do with not having a heart of stone. It means being open and vulnerable to confront and to touch the wounds of the world, to be affected by what happens to people who are far away from you or not related to you or different. And that is it's a weighty kind of burden to take on. But I think again, it's the lack of that means that we just only look after ourselves, and the rest of the world can go to hell. So yeah, exactly. I think so for me that she's a person who really, all the kind of great saints, Saint Francis, many great saints like that, all found some way of making Jesus contemporary and not just a divine figure, in glory, but to make him and to make his teachings relevant to ordinary life, not just in some churchy kind of piety, but in the way you live. And I see her. You say, "Well, how do I place her in the kind of context?" I place her in that as a person, not the only person who's ever done that. There we can think of many others, but a particular person, especially in our North American kind of context, who a wealthy country, etc., but who made this option for the poor, live with the poor, to reject the kind of values of getting ahead and security and protection from other people, to become vulnerable, to become, to express mercy, but to be able to stand up against injustice, to stand up for those who are on the margins and those who are the victims, and the underdogs, etc. And always, to take that side is a kind of real, vindication of radical gospel values.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much, Robert, for that. I see Kyra Jewel has her hand up, and there are a couple of questions.
So beautiful to hear these responses, and what really stands out about Dorothy Day. And when you mentioned her, just the way she embodies the teaching and this holiness of lay people, it just occurred to me to lift up that she's being considered for sainthood. And though she probably wouldn't
Well, she famously said, I don't want to be dismissed so easily, right? Or something.
But she said, "Don't call me a saint."
Yeah, don't call me.
I, in the introduction of my book, I said, Dorothy didn't want to be called a saint; she wanted to be a saint, and
Yeah.
he felt that being called a saint was a way of dismissing her. There was that is to say that, well, she's, she can do these things. She's a saint, obviously. I'm not like
Not
that.
like this.
But as it doesn't pose any real challenge to me, because I'm just an ordinary person. And
Mhm.
it also made it sound like this was all came easily to her, because because she's a saint, and she knew very well just how much she had paid for her vocation and how she, what a, what strength and courage it meant to keep on staying on that path, for her whole life and not giving up. Um, but the other thing, as I said, going back to what I said in the beginning, uh, you read her diaries, you see there's a lot of time when she was crying and feeling in despair and dejected and feeling like miserable and alone and attacked by everybody and a failure and a fraud and a hypocrite and all this kind of stuff. But she always kind of came back to what she called the duty of delight. I use that as the title of her diary. There were things that kind of would bring her back to mindfulness or awareness of God's love, God's presence, and it could be in just something that was beautiful that she saw, or even the memory of beauty. She liked to repeat Dostoevsky's line, "The world would be saved by beauty." It could be just, to spend an afternoon by the ocean on Staten Island where she had a little kind of retreat. It could be playing with her grandchildren. It could be just taking a moment to stop and look at the people who are coming into the soup kitchen and, politely waiting their turn and gratefully accepting a bowl of soup and bread, and the kind of humility. And she would say, and it would suddenly make her feel like, what's the matter with me? God is here. God is good, and her overriding kind of spirit was gratitude. She felt that she'd been given so many gifts, and God had been so good to her, and so she was vulnerable like any of us, and could be down and depressed, but but basically, and then she communicated that to other people that this was that that this was a lot of fun. This was an adventure. You never knew what was going to happen, and this kind of freedom of her life, because if the IRS threatened to take her house away from her because she wasn't paying taxes or something like that, she was like, let them put me out on the street. Try it. It was like, she was not afraid of losing anything, and she'd given up everything, and she was content to live in that kind of vulnerable, precarity, as she called it, and it gave her a tremendous spirit of freedom, which is again a very Franciscan kind of attitude. When you own things, you then are jealous of them and worry about someone's going to take them from you and stuff. You have to have an army and police to protect you.
Wow.
That's so beautiful. Um, there is one question in the chat and a wonderful comment. I'll just read the comment, and then if there's time to just respond to that other question. Someone who grew up Christian, AME Baptist, and learned very little about Dorothy Day, this discussion is providing welcome context and understanding. Thank you, Tracy. This is great, is what she says. And then we have a question. What is the status of the Catholic Worker Mission and presence today? Maybe we could finish with that question.
Well, the Catholic Worker continues. It's the sort of mothership is still sort of the New York community, where they publish the newspaper in their two houses there on First Street and Third Street, and they continue to provide hospitality. They continue to serve meals, and they continue to put out a newspaper and to have Friday night meetings and to engage in protests and around peace and human rights, etc. But there are like 100 or more Catholic worker houses around the country. It's not like a franchise where you get a license to anybody can sort of call themselves Catholic worker community. And there are differences. There are some that are much more aligned with the the local Catholic Church, and others which are more independent or more ecumenical, or even some who don't strongly identify with Catholicism. Um, there are some who focus on a kind of a farming ideal, others who focus more on the hospitality, others who are more involved in the kind of protests. But it's sort of this kind of the recipe of the Catholic worker is this sort of self-replicating kind of sourdough kind of yeast that so that all these houses, if you basically just rely on donations, so you don't have an endowment or something, you don't basically have anybody in charge or rules, so to speak. You draw your inspiration from the gospel as you in through the eyes of Peter Moore and Dorothy Day, and all those kind of elements of hospitality, protest, and kind of personalist values, and kind of open to whoever comes through the door. It ends up kind of always sort of feeling the same. You walk into a Catholic worker house, and it's very obvious. And it's the funny thing is that so that was 50 years ago that I first came to the Catholic worker. Some of the people that I knew are still there in the house. And but the funny thing is that if you look like 50 years before I came, when would that be? 75, that'd be to 1925. That'd be before Dorothy's conversion. And the Catholic worker, I think in the 1930s or the 40s, would have felt very, very different, very like a long ago time. And yet, when I go back there now, it seems like exactly the way it was when I was there 50 years, ago. So it has but Dorothy didn't believe that everybody was meant to be a Catholic worker any more than Francis was trying to make everybody become a Franciscan. It was a kind of a charism, a kind of leaven, in the world and the church, that I think has borne, much greater fruit than, much more influential than you could measure just by the numbers of Catholic worker houses or how many people live there. It's an ideal, it's an idea within the church, and now because of Dorothy's, growing uh, um, recognition, I think that it is she has helped to open the church, make it wider. If Dorothy is recognized as a saint, some people fear that it will make her smaller, but my hope, my confidence is that it will make the church larger.
Thank you so much, Robert. This was just wonderful. You really made her alive for us, and um, so grateful for that. For I don't know, just really, I feel her. Thank you for that.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you so
again
much.
for
Yeah,
joining us. Yes, one of the intentions of this speaker series was to help us really feel close to and how we can embody the qualities of these spiritual radicals. And I feel you've really helped us to do that.
Yeah,
and as we sort of are planning to move upstate and renovate the monastery. One of the things that I recently read, I don't remember if I sent you that, but a little letter that Brother Victor, who was at that monastery, wrote his reflection on Dorothy Day and his sort of contact with her and friendship with her. And he said that her advice to him was be poor, stay small, and humble. And I think that, part of this series is also kind of to help us figure out how can we embody that space. Where are we being called? How are we to be in this world that literally, I mean, seems to be falling apart? Especially as all the craziness that we're seeing, sort of surfaces. So thank you for contributing to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure. I look forward to our friendship continuing.
Same here. Same here.
So we usually close with our Buddhist Christian Bodhisattva prayer. So we'll do that. And Dorothy will be sending out the recording. And we'll see you at the end of May for the next part of this series on Dr. King with Kazu Haga. So I'll share my screen and we'll read this together. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is confusion, clarity. Where there is sadness, joy.
May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those without light, a place of refuge for those who lack shelter, and a servant to all in need. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world.
O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you, Robert. And see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.